Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Richmond, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thanks for having me on, Mary.
I know we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. But before we get to our conversation, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Well, look, the first job really was working on our family farm. It wasn't a paid job per se, but from a very young age was that was just the way we all did it. I was the youngest brother of there was five of us in the family, five kids. And, to be fair, most of the time it didn't feel like a job. It was just an absolute joy to be out working with sheep and cattle and outdoors and working with part of the family. But my first real sort of proper job, I actually worked in a tiny little cool room, cutting up pieces of wheels of cheese to cut them up into tiny little triangles for this company that then was putting them on at the, Qantas, which is an Australian airline. So literally just being in this, there's about four or five of us in the cool room, and we just slice them up, wrap them up, rebox them up. That was my first, it was over a summer. That was really my first proper job.
What was that job like? I mean, was it like 8 hours of doing that? Sounds relatively grueling.
Yeah, it was. It was, you would just come in, you'd have your shift, you do your time. But the repetitive nature of it also, in some ways,
Mm.
was quite calming, because you just kind of sit there and I'm someone who likes to daydream a bit and think and philosophize. And so at that stage, it also meant, just getting into that rhythm, doing something simple with the hands over and over. It was actually quite an enjoyable space. Even though it was quite cold, it was the middle of summer, but we'd have to rug up because we're in this tiny little cool room. But the thing I also did like is I'm someone who really likes the ends things when things are all completed and finished. Like at home, I'd much rather do the dishes because then I'm like everything's done, everything's clean, than cook because then there's still cleaning ahead. And so for me, there was just these little periods of satisfaction where you take the wheel out, it'd get cut up into say 12 or 24 pieces depending on the sizes, and then to see it go back and be all wrapped up and folded back and the lid closed and done, that was something that I really enjoyed. Just that sense of, yep, finished, done, completed.
I really like that point of sometimes we think about something that is repetitive, that it's necessarily drudgery, but repetitive work can free us as well. And, when we think about getting to the zone or in flow state or
Mm.
whatever it might be. And of course, and I also love it because it's not always the work that you're doing, but how you're thinking about the work that you're doing, right? I love that. It freed you up. I just think that's just really interesting to think about.
Yeah, and to be fair, I only did it for a couple of months over a summer. I couldn't have done it for a couple of years. I probably would have got bored out of my brain. But for that period of time, yeah, it was a great little introduction.
So where did you go after your days in cheese?
Well, that was really a part-time job because after school, after a few different things that I tried, I ended up doing physiotherapy. So I went down the physiotherapy path, although very early on, I had a lot more interest in not so much a lot more in psychology and philosophy and the mental health side of things, rather than just the pure mechanical. And I quite liked, I liked sport, and that was kind of sort of thought, oh, get into physiotherapy by doing that. But very early on, I remember thinking about we had at our university we didn't have any chiropractors, but there was this huge rift between the physio community and the chiropractic community. And even at that point, I just remember thinking, hey, why don't we start the school of physiopractic and combine the best of both of them? And so that was always, it wasn't until years later, I did a Myers-Briggs test, and the results. I can't even remember what the actual results were, but I remember what they then said is they said you're someone who likes to take existing ideas and improve upon them. And funnily enough, at that time, while they were adding up my score, I was giving feedback on the Myers-Briggs questions and saying, hey, question 63, if they had have asked it like that, it would have been more specific because it was a bit ambiguous. And then, so I was like, aha, yep, I'm here trying to fix up the Myers-Briggs test to even improve that. And so while I started with physiotherapy, at one point actually deregistered because I really couldn't handle and cope with the insular sort of, in many ways, quite arrogant and ignorant sort of thing of like, we're the best, we're the evidence base, we know everything, the chiropractors are all just a sham. And I just couldn't make sense of, not being able to expand upon what we knew. So while I did physiotherapy, I worked in a range of different things, worked in mental health. I traveled a lot, worked in environmental education, worked in suicide prevention in a charity that was one of the first places in the world to start using the internet for social well-being, with a youth suicide prevention website, way back in the 90s, last millennia. So yeah, range of different sort of jobs. I never had a particular career path. I used to always have this pattern of, what am I going to do with my life? That was quite a daunting question because I really didn't know. I'd do something for a little bit of period of time, but wasn't really set ever on a career path. And even after I left the physio profession, yeah, I just followed my nose, and intuition was trying different things, but hadn't really landed on anything particular for a good 10, 15 years.
Hmm. It's really interesting, all those things that you've said about this idea of, uh, well, why not this? Like the Myers-Briggs. I only took it one time, and I remember being very frustrated because I needed another option at least. And almost all of them, I'm like, you're trying to say it's this, that, or that, and I'm not any of these for a variety of reasons, right? And so
Yeah.
that exploratory curiosity of also
Mm,
wanting to bring things together to make a whole. Like, why are we infighting or, why are we fighting? Why are we trying to claim dominance? Why can't
mm,
we see how all of these things fit together? So that makes sense that you're trying these different things. Um, but then you leave the world of physio to do what? And why did you leave and you left it to do what?
Well, so in a way, I was uncertain about what I was doing. I was kind of just exploring and looking for, what to do and what my role was really. And so I did a lot of traveling. I'd often go overseas for a year and, maybe do some physio or do something else just to earn the income. Then I'd come back and did lots of different things. That's where I started working in youth suicide prevention for a couple of years, back in the day. So very much I was searching and I didn't know what I was looking for. And, the arc of my personal journey that got me to where I was that in my late 20s, early 30s, my body and my life were really grinding down. Like I look back now and I'm like, oh, this is kind of classic. We call that classic burnout. But in my teenage years and my early 20s, Mary, I'd always use sport and exercise to keep myself feeling okay and happy, all that sort of thing. But towards the end of my 20s, I started getting so much chronic pain from, my shoulders were sore. I couldn't swim anymore. My had Achilles tendonitis, so I couldn't run anymore. I'd had periods of chronic back pain. So that, really severe, that point that I couldn't even go up and down stairs because of the neurological weakness. Now, at that time, I was trying all the usual treatments, doing all the physio, doing all those things. And I didn't have any understanding really then that I'd been living with high functioning anxiety, that there was all this stress and anxiety and unresolved sort of trauma patterns in my life. All I knew was that my body was grinding me to a halt, and everything I was trying sort of was no longer working. And that was kind of a turning point where one of my brothers said, "Hey, you need to go and do this meditation." And he sent me off to a 10-day silent meditation retreat that I ended up doing a few of these. A few of these. The first one was just like 10 days of intense pain. I had like 30 seconds of where the pain just sort of melted away. And then as soon as I started thinking, hey, I can meditate and make my pain go away, the pain came back. So super intense. But what it led to was on the third one of those courses that I attended, because I knew there was, it was leading me somewhere. I had this extraordinary experience where when I was in a really deep state of meditation, where I was just observing my body, the passion of meditation form was just basically following your body sensations throughout your body. And my body started to slowly tip forwards while I was sitting on the on the on the cushion. And it was really obvious that I wasn't doing it. Like I remember sort of thinking, even though you're not trying to think, but having this thought of like, hey, I'm not doing that. That's what's going on. And I just kept observing it because that was the whole process. So as my body tipped forwards, and then I thought, I'm going to tip forwards and land on my nose here if I don't do something. And just as I was thinking that, my body jolted and started to move back. And then it sort of, moved back. Now, this is not an uncommon experience for people meditating where they'll find their body shaking or trembling or moving. But in the context of what most of us get told, it's like just sit still. So I snuck back into the hall late at night because I didn't want to sort of, you're meant to sit still. So I didn't want to distract people. And when I went into this state and I just observed my body and I let it move, I went through this extraordinary process where my arm would spiral and move and it would twist up above my head like ways that a day before I'm like, I can't lift my arm that high. And then all of a sudden my arm is lifting itself this high and it's pain free and it's stretching and it feels amazing. And that was a real turning point for me because I was getting sort of introduced to this spontaneous involuntary movement of my body. But at the time, I had no context, and the meditation teachers are just saying, "Stop meditating, sit still, you're going crazy," or whatever. And so then I got kicked out of the course because I was letting my body move.
Oh, goodness.
And it was a wild and I like to say it was a wild and woolly journey because I didn't have any context, and everyone's just like, "You've gone crazy, your body's moving." But it was the start of this process of eventually getting introduced to TRE and a trauma-informed model of these spontaneous movements so that, 6 or 7 years later, I finally had a way of going, hey, this is why your body moves or shakes or trembles while you're meditating. And it's a positive thing rather than a negative. So that was a real turning point out of, again, it began the journey of understanding a bit more about stress and trauma in my body and the level of intensity and tension that I'd always carried, but really didn't understand, what it was, where it was coming from, and more importantly, what I could do about it.
Hmm. So to get to this place where you enjoy sports, you use exercise. I think it's an interesting way of talking about it. Use exercise as people say using it as a distressor, but of course, over exercising or using it. Um,
Mm.
I know some people who use it as like a bulimic, right? So
Yeah.
you're not actually throwing up food, but you're using exercise as the sort of substitute, right? So there are these ways when we think exercise, we think benign. It's always good, right?
Yeah.
But it can be masking, it can cover things up. Did you, I'm not exactly sure how to ask this, but when you felt your body, when you felt yourself doing this and the growing pains in different places, did you know that this was did you have some sort of intuition that you are stressed out, that you have anxiety, or had that always been a part of your experience and so it was just kind of a normal?
The later it was no, I didn't have any kind of idea of I was anxious. I would have always thought of myself as someone who was I'm a bit of an introvert. I don't like socializing. I don't like loud parties. I don't, I had no idea that I was anxious in those settings. It was just, I don't like them. And yeah, I had lived so long in that chronic state of being bound up and tense. But that was just my experience. And I'll never forget, Mary, I don't know whether it was a 20 or a 30-year school reunion. I think it was a 30-year school reunion. And I hadn't been back to the boarding school that I went to. Again, I didn't even realize that it was stressful and traumatic in any way for me. I wasn't abused or anything real physical, but psycho-emotionally, having learnt what I'd learned about trauma and the way it's in the body, I had no idea that I'd been living in absolute hypervigilance for 4 years. And I went back to a 30-year reunion and I saw a guy that I was really good friends with. And so, I'm in this social setting, there's all these anxieties about all these people and what it was like. And I went up and I saw this guy and I walked over to him and, I felt so happy to see him. And I walked up to him, I was like, oh, g'day, mate, how are you? And he just said, without even saying hello, like it wasn't nasty, but he just said, oh my God, you were so intense when we were at school. And it shocked
Mm,
me and it jolted me because, I started to look back and I was like, yeah, it really shocked me. I was like, wow, I thought this guy was my close friend and he'd never said anything at the time.
mhm,
But yeah, it was this kind of peeling away the layers of going, gee, that's what he thought of me back then. He thought I was super intense. I hadn't really thought about myself. And it's only in, talking now, I haven't thought about this for a while at our boarding school, what we had in the final year, you talk about conflict. We would divide up from living in dormitories where you'd have 30 kids in a dormitory in year 9 into the last year, we would pair up with someone and there were two of us would share a room. And my closest friend at that time at the end of year 11, and we formed a room. And in the first couple of weeks of school, we had a major falling out just over sport, playing house into school sort of sports. And, he was, anyway, long story short, we had this major falling out. And we then shared a room for, I would say, another 8 months. And the room it was big enough for two beds and two desks.
mm,
And literally for the next 8 months, not that I sort of knew anything about it, we didn't talk to each other. And we lived in that room together, but avoided each other and literally like wouldn't even look at each other or speak to each other for, 8 months. And it wasn't until years and I didn't talk to anyone about it. It was just like, oh yeah, it's tense, but we just sort of got on with things.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that was part of this journey of looking back. And when this guy said to that, you were so intense. And the thing that really stood out in that also was about the tension, the word intense, meaning the tension in my body, that
Hmm.
I was so bound up. I was chronically just so wound up and tight because at that point, I really didn't have any healthy ways of unwinding that tension. And it wasn't a conscious, this is part of the key thing around my work now, is it wasn't a conscious process. I wasn't choosing to be tight. I wasn't choosing to be intense. I was doing everything I possibly could to calm down and be friendly and relational, but it was outside my, it was this tension was outside my conscious control in the same way that, someone with autism or Asperger's would be saying, look, I'm doing everything I can to be relational, to be calm, to be whatever, but there's something else in the system that's, winding me up unconsciously that at that point I had absolutely no idea about.
Hmm. And so now you're working, you've developed TRE Australia. Can you tell us what that is and how it relates to your journey?
Yeah, so TRE originally stood for Tension and Trauma Release Exercise. It was developed by an amazing guy, Dr. David Berceli, who was working in war zones and natural disasters. And he started to notice people when they were shaking and trembling. And in a nutshell, what we do with TRE is we reframe spontaneous shaking and trembling as a positive recovery resource. So
Hmm.
rather than shaking with anxiety, when we're anxious, the body's shaking to try and reduce anxiety. Or rather than shaking with shock after a car accident, the shaking is the body trying to get rid of the shock and come back to a calm, relaxed place. And so Dr. David Berceli, he wasn't the first person necessarily to notice this, but developed, his process of using exercises to deliberately invoke that shaking and trembling response so it becomes a self-care technique where we can deliberately use this natural relaxation, release, recovery reflex on our own in a safe and controlled way. So I didn't develop the technique, but at the point when I got introduced to it, that was where a friend actually gave me a DVD and I put it in the computer and did a few little exercises. I had this tiny little shake in my legs, almost imperceptible. I didn't think about it and I went to bed. And then what happened, Mary, was I slept like a log, like I hadn't slept in 30 years. And when I got
Hmm.
up in the morning, the tension pattern in my calves had just fallen away. And again, it was another one of these extraordinary experiences where I didn't have any medical understanding. There was no theory about why this had happened, but I just knew that like, oh my God, all that tension, all that intensity, not all of it, but in that moment, so much of it had just fallen away in a way that nothing else had ever done. And that was what sort of sparked me on my journey of exploring this. And I got in touch with David and was lucky to be in the right place at the right time to bring him to Australia. This was back in 2010. And then literally as soon as he came out and we were running workshops, I'll never forget this moment where I'd left him, we'd run a workshop, I think, in Brisbane, and then I'd left him at the airport. He was flying to Sydney to wait for the next workshop the next weekend. And I was flying home to my family because we had young children at the time. So I was like, wanted to get home to my partner and help out. And I'll never forget walking through Melbourne Airport, and there was this massive, huge sign. It would have been 15, 20 meters wide. Like it was enormous up in the gate lounge. I think it was for IBM. And there was a picture of a woman, I think it was, but the words said, have you had your career defining moment yet? And what was fascinating is for the rest of my life up until that point, that question of what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do when you grow up? I would feel deflated. I would feel tense. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'll never forget literally the feeling in my body when I saw that instantaneously without thinking. It was like I had more breath in my chest. I felt taller. I felt more expanded. And I remember then thinking to my head, just kind of popped in my head, it was like, yes, I have. I finally found what I'm meant to be, what my calling is, what my vocation is. I didn't really understand it, but I just had this body response that whatever it was that I was working with, this shaking and trembling response, this was my calling and my vocation.
I love that story so much for a variety of reasons. But I resonate with this idea of searching. Like I know I want to be about something. I know I want to find this mission, but I don't know what it is.
Mm,
And a lot of people find themselves that way. Some people, it seems like out of the womb, they know they want to be fill in the blank, right?
mm,
They know that this is what they want to be. And that leaves the rest of us thinking, oh, shoot, what is that? I want to find this meaning. I want to find this purpose. I want to find this, direction, which is
mm,
not defined by being a person in a company, right? But what is it that I want to be working towards?
mm,
And I think this idea of epiphanies or, finding those things that resonate with us, I would say to those people who are listening, if they want that as well, look for it, seek for it, and
mm,
being open to it, then you can, if you're not open to it, then you're not going to even see that as a question and be able to answer it, right? And
mm,
so being open to what is it that I want to do? What is it for me? And and what do I want to be spending my time doing? And I would say all the detours is a part of finding that piece, right?
mm,
I think about what I'm
mm,
doing now in conflict management, which is what I didn't spend for 20 years. I taught philosophy and all of my philosophical experiences. I see that even more and more every day while I'm doing conflict, how it resonates and how all of those experiences have led me to the second half of my life, the second half of my career
mm,
of what it is that I see that I want to do professionally and when I retire until the end of my days, working on
mm,
these conflict sorts of issues.
mm. Yeah, and when you talk about that, something that was just coming to mind there for me was this sense that I used to always think, what am I going to do when I grow up?
Mm,
And what was fascinating for me was once I got introduced to TRE and started to learn about the trauma-informed model of the body and how the body responds before my conscious mind. I'll never forget talking to David Berceli, and I had this aha moment. Might have been 35 or 36 or something. I don't know how old, but I remember having this realization of when I was looking at the way my body responded to life and saying to David, I said, "Hey, David, I think, I'm however old, 37 or whatever it was, but I think my nervous system is like 13." And this sense that, and this is the way, things work with, not, it doesn't even have to be developmental trauma, but just development,
sure.
is that we often in certain areas will go slower or we won't go along with the same of the rest of our cohort. So I had this real understanding of going, I know that I am this age chronologically, but that my nervous system is still stuck and reacting in certain ways in certain situations that I've never really sort of developed from. And at that time it was like, yeah, I feel like a 12-year-old, I feel like a 13-year-old internally. And so then there was this, there's this discrepancy between how I'm meant to be able to behave as an adult and be calm and grounded and relational and open. Whereas in reality, I was still sort of stuck at this 13-year-old in, stage of, just being frozen and not developing all those relational skills because my system was stuck in this hypervigilant response to everything and being, on high alert. Groups of people, my body was just automatically on high alert, even when I'd go into a group of like my closest friends. And that really sort of started me this on this journey of understanding the term that I love to use, which is physiological maturity. This
Mm,
sense of how's my nervous system responding to situations in the moment, below and before it even becomes a cognitive process. Because, one thing I found, it's even in, think about relationships, I'd be like, I'm asking all the right questions, but people just don't seem to want to talk to me. Or, I'm trying my hardest on a cognitive level to be friendly and engaging or to resolve issues. But underneath all that, physiologically, all these patterns, the energetics of it all, the micro movements in the face, I had no idea that, even if I'm bound up, even if I'm not scared or I'm not angry, but if I'm just frozen, that people's bodies are responding to all those things. So that's where this has been the lifelong journey, really, of watching how using this shaking and trembling response, which actually happens in utero. We all shake and tremble and vibrate in utero. It's a developmental phase, the way that organism develops, and watching how over time it's like my nervous system maturity has been, starting to catch up. Like I probably think I'm about a 30-year-old now, even though I'm 54 in real life. Like, I'm going, wow, my body is starting to respond like an adult, not a always a mature, wise adult, but in lots of things. So it's like starting to catch up. Um, yeah, and that's the exciting thing for me is about using this tremor response is because it's innate in our nervous system. Like every single one of us has experienced shaking and trembling, but we just pathologize it and stigmatize it.
Mm.
But when we let that process complete the stress response to release our trauma immobility responses, what it means is instead of getting stuck in those phases where our system hasn't moved beyond, that it actually completes and releases those so we can then sort of calm down and go into the next experience with a little bit more resilience and more groundedness so we can then develop the relational and personal interpersonal skills, to be able to manage conflict and communicate more clearly and be more authentic in all of that.
When we think about conflict, right, and disagreeing well, healthy conflict, and being able to engage in these kinds of difficult conversations, we talk a lot about emotional maturity, right? And
Mm,
so if somebody is not emotionally mature, it's, we're all in different levels of, maturing and growing. But I think a lot of times that's where the conversation is around.
mm.
And I certainly find this in my work. You have people at work who are in all different places, right, for a
Yeah.
whole host of reasons. And so maybe somebody is shut down or they're maybe not as emotionally mature and somebody else is. And how do we navigate these waters? So how do you see emotional maturity and this physiological maturity? Um, um, I mean, you just
Mm,
kind of spoke to it, but we only
yeah.
really talk about the one. How do you
Yeah.
see them piggybacking or being at odds with each other or marrying each
Yeah.
other?
Okay. So the key thing I would say is there's a difference between behaving maturely or grounded or calm and actually physiologically being calm and
Mm,
grounded. This is the key thing, and it's often the gap that is unconscious between those two things, where there's, like I always think about the term
mm,
anger management. All right. So if
mhm,
someone's got anger issues, basically what we do is we teach them generally, not always now it's developing, but generally it's like how you are going to cognitively override the impulse in your body.
mm,
All right. So you're going to choose to behave a certain way. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. But the reality is all of those emotional responses, whether it's a fear response, whether it's a fury response, fight and flight, whether it's the freeze, the collapse, the containment, I can't think, I'm overwhelmed, I can't even deal with the situation. They are all happening completely unconsciously. And so for me, for example, what I realized is a lot of the time in the conflict, what I found was I was always avoidant of conflict because what it generally meant was I had gone into a freeze containment, which is the trauma immobility response of containing my reaction. And I was always scared is because if I was authentically me, I was going to erupt and I was going to be
mm,
rageful and it would be scary or unsafe for the other person. Now, what it was useful to understand was the intensity of that was not really to do with this particular incident, but it was these patterns, these unresolved patterns that is, developmentally as children, when we haven't integrated those responses and developed and moved beyond them, that there's it's not quite that they're unexpressed, but it's like we haven't learned how to truly release them so that we are truly physiologically calm. Okay.
mm,
And a key turning point for me, a great example of this, is I grew up on a farm and you'd ride horses. And what we'd always be told was don't let the horse, don't be scared. Don't, because if you're scared, the horses feel it and they won't like you and they won't come near you. So I'm like, yeah, but I'm like a tiny little kid and the horse is huge and I am scared. What are you meant to do? Okay. So
right.
this is what I think is the missing link. If you're truly calm and relaxed, you're going to be able to stay engaged and resolve the conflict because
Mhm,
our first protective response is to stay calm, physiologically calm and relaxed, and we're going to engage with our words and our things, and we're going to come from a place of let's work with this and through this together.
mm,
But I'll never forget at a workshop one day, a woman was telling this amazing story where she said she was a horsewoman and she walked out to catch the horse and she said the horse wouldn't come near her. And so she went back inside. She lay on the floor. She did a bit of the shaking and trembling, which is how her body calms down and the nervous system calms down. She said then when she walked back out into the field, her horse came straight up to her. They had a little bit of a cuddle. Then they both lay down in the grass and had a sleep together. Now, what was fascinating for me was two things. The first thing was she was going, the difference that letting my body shake and tremble made on my nervous system state that unconsciously the horse is picking up on, and the horse is now saying, hey, you're safe and okay, and I want to be engaged with you. But the second thing she said was this, which I never knew. She said that horses don't care if you're scared because they can tell that you're scared. What
Mhm.
horses don't like is when you're inauthentic, not
Mhm.
consciously, but when your body is frozen and
Mhm.
masking, they stay away because they know that there's something inside that pressure bubble, but they don't know whether that's fear or fury.
Mhm.
And so it's not actually the fear that the horses stay away from, it's the unknown when the body's immobilized and shut down, or, we use the term masking or armoring. And
Mhm.
so this is what's so critical was this understanding of like, it's the physiology of my body. And when my body is in that state and it's containing something, at a physiological level, it's not that I'm being inauthentic, but it's that it's containing and hiding something, not just from the other person, but from myself.
Mhm.
So that was for me was recognizing that I could go into a situation and what I'm aware of is calmness. I'm choosing to be calm. I'm thinking I'm calm, but physiologically my body is tight.
Mhm.
And that's what the other person's nervous system is reacting to and responding to, no matter what I'm saying. I always like to say, as I could be having a discussion and I say, I love you, whereas the words are almost irrelevant. Okay.
Right.
And so this is where when we try to behave maturely and we
Mhm.
try to be emotionally intelligent, a lot of emotional intelligence, like we know we're triggered, we know we're angry, we know that this is coming from issues with my mother, my father, my trauma, all that. But if physiologically we don't have a way to down regulate them, then it doesn't matter what we do. We're always going to struggle because the deeper reality of our physiology is we are still in a mode of fight and flight or freeze that the other person's nervous system is responding to. I don't know if you have heard the term neuroception. Um, Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed something called the polyvagal theory, and just it's a theory of the physiology of stress and trauma. And he had to develop this term because we didn't really have it. And basically, what it means is that our nervous system unconsciously is constantly scanning everything in the environment to assess it for safety or danger. So, for example, if someone's a little bit angry, but they don't even know it, and their pattern whenever they're in conflict is to be shut down and frozen,
Mhm.
when they come to that conversation, if they've got such a tight jaw or a tight forehead, or their breath is restricted because it's holding in, it could be anger or it could be fear, but just discomfort. My nervous system neuroceptively is picking that up.
Mhm.
So then we're in this, there's this physiological resonance and bouncing that's happening below the surface. So that externally, I think I'm trying to be calm and relaxed and I'm acting calm and relaxed, but my body is holding these unresolved patterns, which generally are probably going to have very little to do with this current moment and much more to do with these habitual patterns. And so there's all this unconscious byplay that's going on when we're trying to resolve conflict, where when we don't look at what's happening in the physiology of the body, we get focused on the details of the external. Oh, you did this, you said that, this and that. And we come up out of the physiology and we don't sort of come from this place of going, when you said this, this is what happened in me. And there's an opportunity to recognize that ultimately a lot of the conflict is internal, where the
Mhm.
conflict is between me trying to behave calm and be nice to you, even though I'm having this triggered reaction. And if I only ever think this is only happening in relation to you, and I'm not able to go within and resolve whatever it's touching into inside, then it's very difficult to resolve conflict or build upon it in a really, productive way.
You've said quite a few thought-provoking things. And when I think about conflict at work, many of us want to intellectualize, right? It
Mm.
is something external. We are just talking about this number, this thing that happened.
Yeah.
And of course, conflict is very, very rarely, I don't want to say never, but about the thing, but it's about
Yeah.
you and me and the situation and the system and all these other sorts of things and everything that's happened in our past. And right, it's this whole collection.
Mm.
And so, we say that communication, as you just so articulately pointed out, it's not what was said, but how it was said and how we felt when it was said. And every place that we go, we are trying to find the lay of the land, and our bodies are picking up on those signals, whether or not we are consciously picking them up. We're trying to pick up who's safe, what's safe, am I wanted here, what is going on. And so I know when I first started, because I spent most of my life conflict avoidant, and when I started to
Mm,
try to deal with conflict because I wanted more authentic relationships, I would say, because I tend to freeze, I would say, okay, I'm shutting my body down to try to be present, right?
hmm
And like this vice grip on my body,
hmm
but keeping myself there, so that the both the freeze and the flight, keeping myself there to try to engage, but I would ignore my body. I mean, a philosopher by trade, we ignore our bodies regularly,
Yeah.
which I don't think
Yep.
is always good. But it's this intellectualizing, and I can intellectualize anything, but it, of course, talk about defense mechanisms, all these other sorts of things. But the more that I'm in this space, and the more I think about durability, durable resolving, and being more confident and being able to have this and engaged,
Mm,
it's the whole person, right? That this,
mm,
as you mentioned, this authentic. I also love that you said that it isn't inauthentic, this sort of tension between emotional intelligence and the body, because
mm,
it's a lot of times inauthenticity is it, it's a deception that we are involved in. But if you don't
mm,
know that this is what's going on in your body and that you're unable to, there are these forces that are dissonant, I don't think it is inauthentic, and yet it's not the full truth of the self, right? Because some of it is hidden.
mm,
And I think that is really important to think. Many of us who are conflict avoidant want to flee, but we're
mm.
also told we want to resolve. And so if we really
Yep.
want to resolve, we're going to have to stay present. But we say, you're only going to get this part of me, right? You can get the intellectual part, but you can't have me.
Yep. Yep.
But what does that do to me, right? And
Yep.
so this whole idea of holding it together, sucking it
Yep.
up,
Yep.
which is not a long-lasting strategy and goes away towards healthy relationships. So can you speak to that a little bit about not simply holding it together,
Yep.
but
Yep.
trying to integrate?
Yep. Oh, look, you've sparking me off in all sorts of directions here. So, just listening to you there, I want to give you a new term that people won't have heard before. It's PQ. All right. So we have IQ. That was where we started, all the cognitive intelligence. Now we're all into EQ and the emotional intelligence. And I'm going to give you the term PQ, which is physiological intelligence,
Mm.
which is understanding underneath the emotional responses is the physiology of our stress and trauma, which is all about movement, which is either about mobilizing, creating movement in the body during stress, or immobilizing and containing movement in the body. And so here's, a great story in relation to this. It was when David Berceli first started teaching TRE. He was working in conflict resolution between Israelis and Palestinians. And he was doing all the usual things. And what would happen is he'd say, they'd come in from their own perspectives. They were all traumatized. They were all defensive. They were all, angry. They were hurt. And so he would do the normal thing, and it was, moderately effective. And then when he'd work, come across this process of this is the way our nervous system regulates itself, not consciously, but as mammals. That's why dogs shake in a thunderstorm. It's all happening at an unconscious level. And so what he started doing was teaching people TRE, getting them to lie on the floor and shake, let their bodies shake and tremble before they would talk to each other. And so the way he would say is to say, shake first, talk second. So what then happened is he said when they got up and they weren't in their habitual protective responses and they were, more grounded and calm and open as human beings, they started to relate to each other. Say, hey, I'm a mother and I lost a son. I'm a mother and I lost a son. Because physiologically, when our nervous system is calm and relaxed, we are naturally designed to stay calm and engage and be in relationship with each other. But 99% of the time when we're in conflict, even though intellectually we are trying to come together, physiologically, if our body is still holding these unresolved fight and flight, it's like everything in our physiology is saying, I don't really want to resolve this conflict. I want to win. And not because I win because I'm a better person, but
Right.
when you're in conflict, the fight or flight battle is or everything in our physiology is to win, and winning might be getting away, or it might be getting power over to stop the intensity and the fear. So this is where what I'm going to term physiological intelligence, not just understanding what's happening in the body, but being able to down regulate that, or a better way of saying that is being open to letting our body down regulate that through spontaneously and unconsciously shaking and trembling and getting us to a grounded place, then means we can come into the relationship from a calm, grounded place. This is what I mean about, getting physiological maturity, so that rather than coming into the, conflict where really I'm back at boarding school and I've got all this stuff going on, but it's all held inside me
Mm.
because I'm scared that if I express any frustration, all the attachment theory is great for this. It's like if I express my true, authentic self, that person's never going to talk to me and I'm going to lose that relationship. But the reality for me was recognizing that if I let go of this frozen, contained, holding it all together state, I am going to erupt, not because of what you said to me 3 days ago, but because I've got all this pent up energy inside me from that wasn't released and down regulated, from back of 4 years of living in hypervigilance at boarding school. And if I can share a story of this, Mary. So doing this work, it's like someone describes letting the body shake and tremble. It's like letting thawing out a frozen chicken in the microwave. Literally parts of this that have been so bound and frozen for so long that we've contained in order to fit in and behave calmly is coming at that cost that the internal reality is not. It's not that I'm actually truly calm and peaceful.
Mm.
And so as we start to let the body unwind us, we often start to get more in touch with what's authentically true in my physiology. So for me, the two patterns was learning over a period of time how anxious I had been my entire life. And in terms of the anxiety, and it wasn't even in conflict, it was just in relationship with people that I didn't know. I'll never forget standing at a workshop one day I was doing a TRE workshop. I was talking to someone and I just noticed I felt tense. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to calm down. I took a big breath. I relaxed my chest. And when I relaxed my chest, my pelvic floor literally hit the ground. And I literally said outside, holy shit, because my whole bum just let go. And I'd been teaching Pilates full time for 4 or 5 years before that. So I'd been working with my pelvic floor and other people's pelvic floor. But in that moment, I realized that for 35 or 40 years, my pelvic floor had been squeezed on and I did not even know. So this wasn't in a state of conflict or, it was like, oh my God, there's this fear. And it took me years to sort of recognize that has coming out of, boarding school and early childhood stuff. So recognizing that even when I was just going into a relational state, my body was bound up and tense. Now, that's going to have a huge impact on how people relate to me because they don't feel warmth. Even though I'm behaving and acting as friendly and as calm and as interested as I can, and I am genuinely having that, is because the other bigger part of me, the iceberg analogy, the part of me below the surface that their nervous system is feeling is, oh my God, that guy's so tense. And
Mm.
that then they feel tense. So it just doesn't flow and resonate. So that's kind of the fear element that we get triggered into. But for me, around conflict, another story, if I may. So
Mhm.
my whole life, I'd had constant dreams, and they were always terror and overwhelm. I'd been in dreams, I'd been shot, I crashed my car's out of control, I've been raped, I've been abused. They were always terror dreams. And I was really grateful a couple of years ago where I started to have my first anger dreams where, I was getting angry at someone. And I had this extraordinary experience. Again, this was as my body started to unwind and as I was thawing out through the shaking and trembling, I was getting much more connected to what was underneath all this frozen intensity that I didn't even know was there. So many times, and many of the listeners will relate to this, is I'd be going to the airport and I had what I like to call post-traumatic screening anxiety. So that's where, when you put your bags out, you unpack your bags, you put them through, then you go through the scanner, you get to the other side, And then while you're trying to put your wallet and your keys and put your computer back in, there's pressure. There's like you're holding up the line and you're getting incredibly anxious because we're holding up the line. I don't know if you've. So I used to laugh about that. I used to talk to David Bursell. I'm like, there's this new diagnosis called post-security screening anxiety. Um, and so I was aware of this intensity of when I was holding up the line. It's like there's something really full on happening inside my body. It's not a big deal. Everyone's experiencing it, but it's happening. And then sometime later, I remember, and I used to laugh about it every time I'd go through the airport. And this one time I went through the screening, I could feel it. I was telling the security guards, I'm going, oh, I'm feeling this post-security screening anxiety. So it was a funny thing. Then I went into the plane and I was standing in the aisle in the plane and I had to put my bags in the overhead locker. And there was a woman sitting, there was three seats, and she was sitting in the seat near the aisle. Now, and the other two seats were free, and my seat was over on the window. So in my mind, I'm thinking if she just moves over one or two seats, I can stand there where she's sitting and get everything in the overhead locker, take my time to get everything else out, and all those people behind me are not going to be waiting for me and getting because I was so anxious that they were going to be frustrated because I don't like to wait for people. And so what came out of my mouth was I said to that woman, it was all kind of happening unconscious. I said, "Oh, excuse me, could you just sit over there for a moment?" Now, in my brain, what was so real for me was because if you sit over there, then I'm not going to get stressed and I can calm down because I'm going to explode because all those people are waiting for me and I'm going to combust
Mhm.
internally. And she kind of just looked back at me and she didn't really understand because I hadn't explained it. It's like, why? And she sort of just gave me a blank face and said, why? Sort of, "Well, why?" And so then I then went to explain, and this is why I'm sharing this story, is what I said was this. I said, because if you, and I said it this way, right? I said, because if you sit over there, I will be able to stand here and those people will be able to get past me while I'm putting my things in the overhead locker. And I'm saying it like that. You can feel the tension and the intensity in my voice. Now, that was what I said. What was actually the intensity behind those words that I was holding was there was absolute rage. Now, that wasn't real because of this conflict with this woman, because I hadn't communicated. It was all going on inside me. But what I'm saying was this was triggering somewhere, a habitual response in my body that if I hold up this process, this is like a life and death experience internally into my physiology.
Mhm.
So, yeah, the reason I'm sharing this story is even when I said those words, what's being communicated, even though I'm trying to resolve this conflict, is this intensity in my physiology that really has nothing to do with this particular moment.
Mhm.
Whereas it's got to do with look at how my nervous system is reacting in this moment because somewhere in my past that I may never ever know, there's this there's this huge protective rage response that's, this over exaggerated response that's happening. Now, in Western psychology, cognitive behavioral models, what we all tend to go is, I have to do therapy and work out why I'm so angry because then I know that. And so we intellectualize it. And if that helps, great. But most of these patterns are happening completely unconsciously. In utero, our limbic system and our brain stem that's generating these fight and flight and freeze responses, that's all online. So the vast majority of these responses are coming long before we've even got a conscious mind, even before early childhood for 2 or 3 years. So why this is important is by going into the body and working with the body, I was able to go, wow, I've got all this unresolved rage sort of responses. It's not like it's carried in my body, but my body's activating. This is what I need to do to survive based around this anxiety of I'm holding people up.
Mhm.
That's a long-winded story, but hopefully that it brings into this sense that as we thaw out,
Mhm.
for me, as much as you go, gee, I don't want to be angry, but the reality was I had all these angry responses that were being contained and held that are being communicated unconsciously anyway. It was a step on the journey to learning how to be calm rather than how to act calm.
Yeah, thank you for that story. It's very evocative. And one thing that you have said many times is this idea of a journey. And I
Mm,
think that's really important for people to hear because so much in our culture, we just We want to go through the training, we want to get the answer, and now we have it. And that's just not the way that it works. But it is a
Mm,
journey, and there is a process. And learning skills or virtues or different ways of being in the world, it should take time. We should expect it to be a bit painful and should
mm,
take time. And of course it would. And it's worth it. So if let's think about somebody who's at work and they find themselves in a conflict with a boss or a colleague.
mm,
How can what you've been talking about today, what could they do to help them center, be present in their body so that they can
mm.
use like the intellectually what they want to be doing,
Yep.
but they can bring their body along with them.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to give the listeners that I find incredibly helpful, and I don't want people to overthink it. It's not relevant in all situations. Don't, it's a tool that when it's useful, it's useful. But something that's incredibly useful that I use with my trainees is when you're having these responses or you're in conflict, is to ask yourself this question: is my body under threat right now? Is my body under threat right now? And if it is, I say to people, then fight or flee for your life. Go your hardest. But if it's not, then that starts an interesting inquiry, which is right. So what is under threat? It's often, my sense of self, my ego. Not to say that that's, oh, therefore we dismiss that, because that can be real if I'm being suppressed or I can't express myself. But often that question starts to bring us back into the body. And the second question then would be, we use the term, where is my body on the curve, meaning the polyvagal curve? But it's like, a really simple sort of three-tier model is my body truly calm and relaxed in this moment? And if it is, great, then I'm in this engaged state. Or is my body mobilizing? Is it in fight or flight? Am I activated? Am I, hyper arousal? Or is my body immobilized and I'm feeling this sense of freeze, I'm frozen, I'm tense, I'm containing, or collapsed? We call it the freeze or the fold response. Like this is overwhelming. And I think the most significant thing is if we can catch ourselves and say something along the lines of, I am so activated at the moment. I am so dysregulated at the moment. I am so triggered at the moment, whatever we want to say. And for me, I always like this thing is, if I'm triggered, the gun is inside me. Normally, when we're triggered, and our whole fight and flight defensive response is designed to focus out there. It's designed to go, you're the problem. Now, that's not because I'm intellectually not, haven't got EQ or IQ. It's because physiologically, that's what fight or flight, our nervous system is designed to put the focus out there. So when we find ourselves focusing out there, it's a sure sign that something's going on in here. So I think, even being able to say, hey, look, I want to resolve this conflict, but at the moment, this is something really deep is going on internally inside me that I need to deal with myself. So it's that looking within. I think that's the most critical thing. And David Berceli, one of his famous quotes, again, working in these war zones, is that external conflict ends with the dawn of internal peace. I'll
Mm,
say that again. External conflict ends with the dawn of internal peace. So whenever we're in conflict,
mhm,
would be to go within, to go into our own system. And this is why I love, I'm so passionate about using this human tremor and shaking reflex. And this is what was happening in when he was working with Israelis and Palestinians. Normally we go, oh, well, I need to think about it. I need to do something. But these responses, these conflict responses in our physiology are all completely subconscious. Otherwise, we would all choose to be completely calm and relaxed, to be completely mature and grounded, and we would never have conflict. We'd just have discussions and resolutions. So the reality is the missing link in everything that we are trying to do in conflict management is generally we're doing it consciously and cognitively. And that's wonderful. And we know how that benefits. But the missing link is dealing with the 70, 80, 90% of what's happening in our physiology, which is unconscious. And currently, we try and do conscious things to change that. Like we do breathing to change the reaction and calm ourselves down. And that's not wrong or bad because it means we can behave that way. But generally, it means we're cognitively overriding the reality rather than truly resolving it.
mm,
So when we build in this piece, to all your listeners, to everyone, I'm just saying, learn how to access this natural shaking and trembling reflex because then when you are triggered and you're saying, hey, I'm really triggered and I can't consciously stop that trigger. I can't stop this reaction. You're going, great. Let your body unwind that unconsciously by shaking and trembling. You may or may not ever know why, but when that calms your nervous system down, then you can come back and you're more physiologically calm and grounded. The other person's nervous system is going to come from that place. So it's getting into the physiology of, underneath conflict resolution. It's getting into the physiology of connection. And from that place, as humans and mammals, we're designed to be in relationship and it's us together. Let's work through this together because physiologically, we are in that connected space. And if we do that first, this is why David Berceli used to say, shake first, talk second. If everyone in the world, before we had an argument or raised an issue with our boss or with our intimate partners or with our children, if we just lay down and did 5 or 10 minutes of tremoring and we let our body down regulate, the potential and the power to change, we would stop having conflict resolution. We'd be having, connections that were then helping us resolve not just what's happening now, but helping resolve the unresolved that we're carrying inside us without having to know it. But then in relationships, like, wow, this has become a positive thing where something inside me has healed and resolved and matured through this interaction rather than I just got to overcome this so I can maintain my sense of self.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to have to listen to this this conversation again and really think about what you're saying. And I'm conscious of our time, which has just completely gotten away from us. So I have a last question that I'd like to ask all my guests, which is, when you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all people be treated with dignity and respect, but that people will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
So I am very biased. So this is, very biased. And in amongst everything else, this is the area that I would like to influence is that when I look forwards into the future of work, is that recovery in all its forms, physical and psycho-emotional, will be built into the workplace.
Mm.
People who will be paid to have a period of recovery before they go home, rather than saying you have to recover from the stresses of your job in your own time, not just on an ethical level, because productivity goes up when people are more resilient and sustained. And what that looks like for me would be that on a Friday afternoon, for example, the last half an hour of the shift, you've got people lying on the floor, shaking and trembling. You might have someone else doing yoga, someone else might be doing Pilates, someone else might be meditating, but that people will be integrating this spontaneous shaking and trembling response, which is helping us come out of the internal conflict, the unresolved inside us, so that we can finish the workday and go home to our families and friends without carrying that all home, generally as tension, because we don't want to dump it on our family, because generally we haven't yet learnt successful ways of dumping it out of our physiology, which is what the shaking and trembling does.
That's a wonderful answer. Well, Richmond, thank you so much for your work and a lot to think about. And thank you for being on Conflict Managed.
Thanks very much for having me.
Take care. Richmond, thank you so much. When we stopped this podcast, we had a little conversation, and in my own journey to have more authentic relationships and to be better at dealing with conflict, I have known for a while that nervous system regulation is on my horizon of something I need to work on and also learn those skills to help the people that I deal with in my own practice. So I encourage you all to go out and investigate and look at TRE Australia or you can go to trecourse.com. He's got courses that you can actually practice this and learn how to um, shake and tremor. And I'm excited to go on this journey, and I hope you follow me as well to try this out if you haven't tried it before. And if you know about it, send me an email and give me some guidance as well. I'd appreciate that. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this, that's greatly appreciated. If you haven't checked out my latest book, Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset, it helps us think about How do we have healthier work environments and talk to those people, those older people, those younger people, those people in the middle? How do we really bridge that generation divide so that we can actually collaborate and have healthy work environments? Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.